Welcome to the C Suite. Thanks for joining us for another episode. Today, we're talking about how to deal with blind spots. When you're at the top, feedback gets quieter, but the need for clarity actually grows. Today, we're going to explore how seasoned leaders, like the members of this call, stay self aware when no one's holding up the mirror. So, gentlemen, how do you self assess when there's no one offering you feedback?
I'll take that one, Stacey. I think this is a great question, and thanks for keeping this going with our audience members all the way back from August when we met all in person. So, yes, traditional feedback that you get, uh, whatever level that you're at before you get to the C-suite, tends to wane or even disappear completely when you get to the C-suite, like written annual reviews, sit downs periodically or annually with a supervisor or a coach or an HR person. Routine performance discussions, things like that tend to disappear as you get up closer to the C suite. And definitely when you get to the C suite, they're really waning. So a lot of C suite members I talk to don't have those more traditional feedback roads or inroads or insights. But I think feedback still exists and it's pretty much everywhere. But as a C suite, you're kind of expected to go figure out where it is. And the places where I would look at are your outcomes versus firm goals. So your feedback is more self assessment, observing yourself or how you interact with others. So evaluating like outcomes versus the firm goals. Are you meeting the firm's goals? Because the buck stops with you at the C suite level. You've got to figure out, are you really meeting the firm's goals? Do you understand the firm goals and how well has the team done with the outcomes of those goals? Another one might be trust indicators or trust signals. Do your colleagues, your peers, your supervisors, the board of directors, do they trust what you're saying? That's excellent feedback. And if you can observe and discern those trust signals, to make sure that you're highly trusted. I mean, you're paid and you're operating at that high trust level. You need to make sure that your feedback signals that you're getting in trust are matching what is expected of the role. The team behavior is your team, especially the managers or the folks right beneath you that you're working with. Are they trusting you? Are you trusting them? Do you have a good formal relationship of open lines of communication? So you become your own reviewer, your own feedback source through your observations. So being honest about your self-assessment, measuring against your commitments, measuring against your mission of the department and the firm. Those are the things that I would tell you to look at for your feedback to make sure that you're getting that fuel to make sure you're headed in the right direction rather than relying on some annual review or a written review, which you may not get at the C suite.
I always tried to solicit because we would go through the formal process. It's just getting people to provide feedback is sometimes challenging. I would always try to solicit feedback from people that I knew were disgruntled through the year to try to get constructive criticism because they're complaining to somebody usually, but can we put that on paper so that I can actually make it actionable? And having those conversations I found to be very productive, like intentionally seeking out the difficult conversations. And because we've all had an opportunity to make someone unhappy with our decisions. So to really get that direct feedback was useful.
Well, Skip, you said something that resonated with me in there. You were talking about goals and expectations, right? Are you meeting the goals? Are you meeting the expectations? In the legal space, where we sit, chances are we're non-attorney C-suite members, meaning we're not owners, we're not managing members. So those expectations are being set above us. So there's a good possibility there's a feedback mechanism that exists above us, whether that's a board of directors or ownership or management, thankfully. And at any level of the C-suite, there's usually somebody above us. Unless you're the owner of the company, there's usually somebody at your level or above that is more than happy to provide some feedback. And hopefully that's a good relationship, because otherwise that's not probably a great place to be.
Even if you're the owner of the company, the clients, your customers will provide you with
Yes.
feedback.
It just goes the other direction, right? Feedback comes from the other way. Instead of from above, it comes from below. And if you're a middle management, it comes from both. Good luck. So, yeah.
They call them 360 reviews.
Yes, you don't have a choice.
Building on your comments, Adam, one of the things that I think can also be really, really helpful is when you have, whomever is your boss, if you are able to have a conversation such as they've come out of their meeting, they've come out of their presentation, there was a big meeting that they were in. And while you're talking with them, asking questions such as, is there anything I can do to help you? Are there any areas of concern that we can work on? Is there something that's suddenly becoming hot? And to say they may not be coming directly to you, but it is coming somewhere. And your boss is an excellent starting point on that journey. And particularly when they come right out of a meeting, if anything's hot and of notice, you can hear about it in real time. And at a minimum, you're demonstrating responsiveness.
So, how do you know when you've drifted off mission and how do you get back on track?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways that you can look at it. One of which is you can trust your gut. And if you feel everybody's going one way and you're not, that is usually a good indicator. Another of which is if you're ever in a situation where you were 100% certain you were right and everybody else saw it differently, and then it was proven that they were right, whatever your perspective is, it's not aligned with the reality that you're dealing with. Doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that you're not thinking in the same way that other people are. And there's a little bit of a gray area here. The goal, in my opinion, is not to have everybody sing from the same song sheet perfectly all the time, but you have to be singing the right song. If you happen to be taking a really definitive position, we're going to do this, we're not going to do this. Well, then you've got to have the math and you got to have the position to back you up. I'll give you a small example. AI is permeating all of our lives. If you are drawing a line in the sand as you are going to be the last person on the AI train, that is something that you're quickly going to find one way or another that you are not in alignment with what other people are thinking. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be on the bleeding edge, but being on the dull edge, that's a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to be the last person to adopt AI, that ship's already sailed. Kind of everybody's doing it in one way or another. Okay. If you could give your pre C-suite self one bit of advice, what would that be?
It's a great question. I think for me, it would have been to slow down and just listen. I personally went into my first leadership role guns a-blazing, and this wasn't C-suite, this was directorship level, but I think it applies regardless. And that was my pre-C-suite self, C-suite self. I would have loved to take a step back and just listen and learn, because you get that role and you think, I got the title and you know what's going on, and you're going to come in and you're going to make some really big changes and people are going to love you for it. And then reality hits. It's not the way it works at all. I wish I would have just taken a step back. And I had some really great advice from a high school teacher that I will never forget. And I may have shared it before, which is I won't always be nice, but I'll always be fair. And I know that sounds a little bit harsh, but it has served me so well. I've also tried to be too nice at times. People will respect people who are fair. People will trample on people who are too nice. And so finding the balance between coming in too hot and heavy, sitting back and listening, and just being fair in every situation. And doesn't mean you have to be mean, but just the ability to really listen and learn. We think when we get a title, it means that we know everything. But just because you graduate school and you have a medical degree doesn't mean you know how to be a doctor, right? And any attorney will tell you just because they got barred in a state doesn't mean they have a clue how to draft a trust or to litigate in court. They can't go in for a murder case on their first day, right? They have the title, but that doesn't mean they know what they're doing. So when you do get that opportunity to take that next step, do it humbly, and that'll go along.
Wish I had gotten a coach earlier in my career to get that outside perspective, to get that motivation. I think having a coach would have been much more useful before I got into the C-suite. Not that it hasn't been useful during the C-suite experience, but
But can I ask you, Stacey? So you brought up the idea of a coach. Do you ever find though that coaches sort of are that double-edged sword where it's hard to strike a balance between the cost that we invest in a coach and and the benefit we get from the coach? Because I find myself, right. So I also did the same thing where I wish I would have gotten a coach sooner, but at the same time, I sometimes find that having a coach takes so much energy to have that meeting with the coach, to listen to the coach, to then implement the ideas that the coach has. When you're like, wait, that's not practical for me. What are you talking about? You don't know my business. You don't know my line of work. You're a coach, right? And I think about how much time and money I've spent on coaching over the years. How do you know when it's worth it? How do you know when you have the right coach?
I mean, it's like finding a therapist too, though, right? Like you've got to find one that works for you. It's
Yeah.
not it's not all coaches are the same. You certainly for us, I mean, law firms are unusual work environments. And so, a coach that's very successful in a high-tech software company, like their advice might not necessarily translate to our reality. So you've got to find one that works for you and the cadence that makes sense for you. Because yeah, if you're meeting every week with your coach and you got homework every week, like that's a full-time job.
Yeah.
I think one of the things you also have to be careful of is which feedback you listen to.
Mm.
So sometimes, and I've had this experience with coaches over the years, both athletically and professionally, what I was hearing is what they wanted me to do as compared to either what I could do or what would be better given my talents or my circumstance. So, a small example, if somebody was asking for my feedback and I were to say, well, back in 1990, what you could have done, I mean, that's useless. I mean, maybe it's of interest in terms of history, but
Hmm.
in terms of practicality, it's very, very different, that type of thing. If somebody were to say, how do you prep for a board meeting? Okay, I can share thoughts on that. Another thing that I find with coaching is sometimes people will say, you should. Okay, well, rather than talk at a person, something that always resonates with me is when somebody presents concepts. If you're seeing everything as a conflict, perhaps you need to change your perspective and separate the difference between an ask versus an attack. An attack is really, really purposeful. It's easy in your mind to think of something as an attack. The reality is most people don't attack. They ask questions. They want stuff done. They need help. They're frustrated. It's rarely a personal attack, although it can feel like that in the moment.
Yeah.
So if you're predisposed to that, getting some quote unquote feedback or working with some coaching from the perspective, can you disassociate for a second and look at this as it's just a question, it's just an ask, that there's not volatility behind it? That can result in meaningful progress. If the person's telling you that what you're doing is wrong, people just shut down is my experience.
Yeah.
So trying to loop a couple of things together. One of the things that I have found to be powerful whenever I'm giving a performance review or when somebody's giving me feedback and such is, here's the situation, here's the context, here's what would have been an ideal outcome. How do you think that could have happened? Versus here's what you did wrong.
You know, what's interesting to listen to you guys talk about this is an article, and I had to pull it up real quick because you guys were speaking exactly to these items in this article from the Harvard Business Review back in 2017. It was called The Biggest Mistakes New Executives Make. And let me just share with you the list. It's exactly what you're talking about. Trap one, propose new vision for the organization immediately. Very bad. Trap two, make too many big decisions quickly. That was exactly what Adam was talking about. Trap three, tell people you did things better in your previous organization, what Jim was just talking about. Trap four, prioritize external relationships over internal ones. And the last one is trap five, go it alone. And you could probably think of executives that you've seen in roles violate three or all five of those, and you see them crash and burn every single time. So I thought it was a fantastic article. I'll see if we can include it in the show notes.
It's great.
I think that third to last, second to last one, talking about the previous employer, I can't tell you how many times, even at any level, somebody said, well, where I used to work, we did it this
Mhm.
way. And I've always wanted to say, well, then you can go back there if you'd like. That's fine. I'm not sure why you're here then. Thank you.
We we have a running joke on my team. We talk about our former employment as like ex-boyfriends or ex-significant others. Well, my last friend did it this way. It's like, well, you're
Yes,
not with that firm anymore.
exactly. Also, you don't talk about exits. That's just off the table,
No,
right? So don't talk about
mhm.
your last place either. Now, if you have ideas from them, you could try to frame it in a better way. Hey, I've heard this might work. You could try to come up with something.
Now, ironically, the flip side of that statement works really, really well. I tell you what, at my last firm, we didn't do this right.
Yeah.
This is what was
Yes.
done incorrectly.
Hmm.
People listen to that.
Sure.
So
Well,
you can play
unfortunately,
that.
because people like to crap on others. So if you can, people listen to negativity versus positivity way too often.
So I'll keep this very, very vague, and I'll just use this as an example. I've worked at a couple of places that have difficulty deleting email. Talking about the challenges that come from not deleting email is something that people will listen to, even if they don't like deleting email.
Hmm.
Taking the position of email was managed wonderfully, well, at least in my experience, is, I mean, it operationally it was great. The fact that the delete key was the single least used key on the keyboard, that was a problem.
Okay. So, which roles or decisions shaped your style? And what did they teach you? So for me, believe it or not, it was bartending. So in my youth, eons ago, I was a bartender and really learning that the customer isn't always right, but they're always the customer, and bringing that forward in my career in interfacing with people, I think has made a fundamental impact on how I lead and how I solicit feedback.
Yeah, I
'Cause
talked about this. Oh, sorry.
no, there's nothing like being behind the bar in the French Quarter to
Yeah,
lessons.
I have talked about my past plenty of times here too. Yeah, coincidentally, we'll bring that full circle, at least employment past. And one of the things that I've taken away from working in emergency services, it's a great line that we used to use, and they use it in the movie Code 3 that recently came out with, those who don't need us call us, and those who call us don't need us. And that is so applicable to everyday life in my job, right? because a lot of people that will come to you and say, "Hey, I need you to help me with this." You're like, "You know the answer to this. You can figure this out on your own." And then on the other side of that coin, I'll have somebody come to me and say, "Yeah, I mean, this has been bothering me for a while." It's like, "Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you come to me and say, 'Hey, I have this problem?'" Whether it's IT related, operationally related, marketing, intake, who knows, but they should have come to you sooner. But people are human. And so, working through that in emergency services for the longest time, you realize you're not going to change people. They are going to be who they're going to be. And that will always ring true no matter what you do.
Mine was I joined the Army at 17 years old. So I kind of cut my teeth very early, got some great opportunities to learn leadership from the ground up in sometimes very interesting situations and environments. The military really thrusts you into these leadership roles pretty much right away. So at 19 years old, you might be leading a group of 3 or 4 other people on tasks, problems, or missions. And it's really a great way to start out your life is getting those opportunities early in life because it kind of really trains you on what works and what doesn't. And they have a lot of tried and true training methods in the military. I mean, yesterday was the US Army's 251st birthday. So they have over 2 centuries of hard fought, won leadership experience training environments that they've developed. So it is a really good program in the military. If you anybody else that's a fellow veteran, you know that you just get these great opportunities to do that. It's not always fun, but it's great learning opportunities.
Me, I think it's a little bit of a counterintuitive approach, and it was the one that ultimately made sense to me. When I was early in my career, I would idolize particular people and I would say, I want to be like them. And I would learn either quickly or over the course of time, I couldn't be like them. I'm not them. I'm just not. I can't do some things the way some people do and such. And then I pivoted to something that's far more sustainable is I would take a look at people and see them perform in the moment and they did something really, really well. And I'd focus in on that and say, okay, how is it that they were so ready for that? Or how is it they were so calm during that crisis? Or how is it they were so present when that person was upset? How is it that they took a person that was really upset and helped them come down to a point where you can have a conversation about next steps and such? How does this person summarize a meeting well? Those type of things. And I found that it was easier for me to emulate their best traits as compared to try to imitate them. And by the same token, when I was getting feedback from folks, when people would say, for example, you can come across a little intense, they're not wrong. Me trying to pretend that I don't take my job seriously is a fail. Oh, one of the things that I have to do is remind myself, okay, smile on occasion when I'm listening to somebody, because when I'm really into what they're saying, I'm looking rather intense. So again, not trying to imitate other people, taking the best of what they have presented, trying to incorporate that into the mix and building an overarching suite of skills that on occasion require a little bit of maintenance, I have found to be a more sustainable path forward. So there's a lot of people in my past, both good and less good, that have taught me a lot or taught me what not to do. And I thank them all.
Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Another excellent episode. And thanks to our listeners for joining us for So You Want to Join the C Suite, where we go behind the title and inside the realities of law firm leadership. Next month, we'll talk about future proofing. And don't miss us at ILTACon. We'll be back on stage in Nashville for So You Want to Join the C Suite live. Thank you.